Hey, happy Halloween, everyone. You all know we love our monster movies, right? Frankenstein, The Creature from the Black Lagoon, The Blob. The greatest monster films work because they can be enjoyed from two different perspectives. You can just sit back, watch these things, and go, oh, look, scary things terrorizing people to bloody death. How will the humans win? Or you can really let them get into your brain and realize the ways in which they can actually have something to say about our world, about the human condition, or even challenge our views on both. You can enjoy these films either way, the way you want to enjoy them, and you'll be provided with a fulfilling experience either way. That being said, the subtext is always there, whether you want to engage with it or not. The films are saying something. The Creature from the Black Lagoon interrogates colonization and the deconstruction of natural resources. Frankenstein explores our ideas of creation and what life truly means, how hard life is for so many of us. I mean, people literally come at him with pitchforks and torches. It's brutal. And then there's Dracula, the horror antagonist to end all horror antagonists, in my opinion. There's a lot to read between the lines with this guy, largely because there have been so many interpretations and adaptations of him. The subtext of Dracula has changed over time as different filmmakers have focused on different elements of who he is. The Legosi era established who Dracula was going to be for the silver screen. It focused more on the theatricality of the character, the aesthetics, the selfish desires of man. The Lee portrayal, my personal favorite, and one which we already covered on the channel last year around this time, almost looks at the character as a rumination of abuse of power that a figure of wealth and authority is capable of. It also examines this character as a predator in many senses of the word. Which brings us to Francis Ford Coppola's version of Dracula, which, unlike the Legosi or Lee films, makes Dracula not just the villain, but more the main character, a man-made prisoner of time, one who's experiencing a period of self-loathing, self-doubt, retreating into himself. It's a portrayal that almost humanizes the Count, which theoretically shouldn't work in a monster movie. Usually when you make the monster the protagonist, things start to get a little dicey because that monster then loses what it was that they were there to represent. That's not necessarily the case with this weird little anomaly that is Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. It's a deeply fascinating character study, and hell, it's one of the best horror films of all time, right? No? Whoa, okay, that's interesting. Why? How can so many people say with a straight face that this magnificent work of cinema is bad, or it's a style over substance sort of thing? I love it, and I always have. The colors, the practical effects, the atmosphere, the brilliant performances. Yes, performances, plural, not just Gary Oldman. You know, he's a powerhouse, and he's a powerhouse in this film, but all of the performances work. All of this film works in this perfect, weird harmony. Is the movie flashy? Hell yeah, it is. I wouldn't want it any other way. That's the point. This is an operatic view on eternity, the curse of being a vampire and love. The tagline of this movie is literally, love never dies. You're not gonna get more campily dramatic than that, and it's completely earned by the film. This concept and way of approaching a monster movie is different, but it's brilliant. And you know what? We're gonna talk about why. But, if I'm gonna do a video on Bram Stoker's Dracula, I should probably get an expert who loves this film even more than me, which is weird to say because I already really like this movie. Hey, Cade, you wanna take over here and you wanna do the video?
Sure, yeah, okay.
Okay, cool, yeah. All right, well then I'm gonna leave you in the more than capable hands of Editor Cade, who loves this movie more than anyone I think I know, and it's like his favorite horror film, one of his favorite Dracula movies, vampire. You know what? I'm gonna shut up and he's gonna take the wheel and blow your minds.
Dracula might be the most iconic of all the movie monsters. The slicked back hair, the cape with the oversized collar, his piercing gaze.
Give me some Dracula.
It's some of, if not the most enduring imagery of horror cinema. But there's one problem with all this iconography. It's copyrighted. You see, Bram Stoker's Dracula, the book, is in the public domain. But the Dracula that has defined pop culture, the universal monster movie Dracula, Son of Dracula, House of Dracula, Bela Lugosi in his iconic performance with a vaguely Eastern European accent, are locked in a vault that not all filmmakers get to play around with. So, Coppola, yes, the Francis Ford Coppola, chose to make a distinction. His is not the Universal Pictures Dracula. It's not the Dracula you know. It proudly announces that this is Bram Stoker's Dracula, a blood-soaked masterpiece that not only is going to reinvent your view on this classic monster, but could make you feel for him in a way you never thought possible. This film follows the plot of the actual Dracula book much closer than its Universal counterpart. That being said, the themes this picture chooses to explore, you know, what subtext is and stuff like that, they're all its own. This movie focuses on love, Dracula's love to be exact. Dracula goes from England to court Winona Ryder's Mina because she looks exactly like his dead wife Elisabetta, but that's another thing that sets this adaptation apart. Dracula has a deep backstory in this. Stoker based his original Dracula on Vlad the Impaler, the famous Wallachian? How do you say this word? I've never seen this. I've never had to say this word out loud before. Wallachian. The infamous Wallachian prince, who, as the name implies, was a brutal guy, terrorizing Eastern Europe for his own power and gain, and who was sometimes also referred to as Dracula. And here, that historical context has changed. Vlad is seen as a hero in this story, a great warrior. He goes out to battle, and in the battle's confusion, he's assumed dead. After hearing this news, Elisabetta kills herself. When Vlad returns, he's heartbroken. He fought for love, and what was he given in return? A shattered dream. He renounces God there and then, stabbing into the center of a cross and drinking the blood that pours out of it. In that moment, out of his pain, he becomes Dracula. These opening minutes of the movie are nothing short of utter insanity. In fact, this entire movie is fucking bonkers and absolutely drenched in blood. I love it. The passion of the filmmakers is palpable. Coppola crafted a team that gives this picture such a unique style, from the way the camera moves at different points, illustrating the operatic sensibilities of Dracula and the world he lives in, to when it moves in a frantic fury, much like the camera in Evil Dead, to show the monster that is inside Dracula. The film won 3 Oscars that year: Best Makeup and Hairstyling, Costume Design, and Sound Editing. And all 3 of those little golden guys are wholly earned. The sweeping Victorian romance blends perfectly with the ideas and iconography of classic horror, illustrating a fully unique and distinct interpretation of this Dracula's world. What puts it over the edge are the practical effects, though. The visual effects company that was assigned to the film didn't share the same vision. They wanted to use CGI. So Coppola, as he does, fired them, and in their place, he hired his 26-year-old son, who at this point in time had never worked in the effects industry before. But Coppola's just a kooky, crazy guy. What are you gonna do? And they created a film that's so visually striking, so hypnotic, you can't look away. It's a big budget passion project for the whole family. Passion for the source material, the craft, the atmosphere. It all exudes Coppola's personal touch, and that attention to detail trickles down into Dracula's passions in the film. Vampires are a monster with inherently sexual undertones, and specifically that of a non-consensual nature. In this movie, it's shown as a disease that slowly takes over you, akin to something like the bubonic plague. We see this in Lucy, Nina's childhood friend. When Dracula comes to England, he starts to feast on her blood night after night. This makes her go from a bubbly socialite to a weak, bedridden husk of her former self. And each time Dracula feasts on her, it is depicted in a heavily sexualized manner. Even that time where he was a wolf, but we can look past that part maybe. Lucy floats through the gardens, draping her red gown over the statues. She isn't hiding, she's being convinced to see Dracula's curse almost as a liberation. Being a vampire isn't just a disease that riddles your body, it's something that fills you with power. Power that until this point you might not have even imagined.
You've got mail.
Oh, I just got a fax from Griffin? You could have just texted me. I didn't even know I had a fax machine. So to circle back to Lucy, her story in this is pretty similar to that of the original novel with one key difference. Lucy in the movie is a very free-spirited kind of person. She's very keen on her sense of self and particularly in her sex life. I mean, she's courting 3 men for the whole movie, including Cary Elwes, and he's one handsome boy. But this movie is also just filled to the brim with hot people. Lucy is kind of the first version of the if you want to survive a horror movie, don't have sex trope. At least in the book. They did this a lot in movies before this one, but here we're getting a sort of nuanced approach to this idea. During the time period this movie takes place, being sexually open and liberated, especially if you were a woman, was super frowned upon. So when Lucy becomes a vampire, it isn't freeing some deeper desires from within her. She's already outspoken about her sexuality, but now it's more twisted because she's undead. She isn't allowed any redemption for her promiscuity, even though this movie is literally about a guy who has murdered thousands and done so much worse shit, finding the good in him again. So what does this say about Lucy? It's nothing on her. She should be allowed to be free and do whatever she wants to do with whoever she wants. But society is frowning on that. The patriarchy that for some poisonous reason civilization seems so hell-bent to be built off of is frowning on it. So in the world's eyes, she becomes a monster just for being herself. A fate that isn't bestowed to the male lead of the film. The dynamics are also shown in how much more power Dracula lords over people. We see Renfield, the original realtor sent to give him his house in England, driven past the brink of insanity and played pitch perfectly by Tom Waits, I might add. He eats bugs and his life can only be sustained by taking the lives of other living things. Dracula has promised him immortal life for his servitude. To put it simply, Dracula is gaslighting these people. He's the ultimate force of power for evil, a predator that hunts without an equal, and this is where the provocative richness of this version of the character comes into play. The complicated questions that deepen this adaptation. How can we empathize with a person capable of such truly despicable acts? How are we able to see the human underneath this monster? Well, for one, Dracula doesn't see his vampirism as a gift. His eternal life is a curse, one that he will give to others, but not one that he wants to. Because if all of his power, all his time on Earth has taught him one thing, not having a purpose to your life, not having anything to tether you to some sort of reality, it tears you apart. So, though on one hand he's an awful monster, Dracula simultaneously understands that he has a curse, not a gift. The cycle of this curse started with Dracula himself. With his renouncement of God, he becomes enslaved to the eternal life of a vampire. This entire journey that he goes on directly parallels that of the story of Lucifer. An angel, one of God's emissaries, defied the will of God and was struck down. In turn, he becomes the ruler of the dead, the king of the underworld, a god in his own right. Dracula fought for God, served to fulfill his will, and at no point did he defy him in his life as a man. Yet, all that he truly fought for was taken from him anyway. He did nothing wrong, at least in his eyes, no measurable disservice to God. So of course he strikes out afterwards, his rage filling his soul, becoming in and of itself a new deity. And in doing so, Dracula too becomes a god, but not one who wants to contain that power. The way that his power is shown in this movie makes him seem unstoppable. His eyes pierce through the sky, giving him an omnipresence. You may think yourself safe, but Dracula knows what you're doing. Even when playing docile, his power is felt. His true intentions are understood. When Jonathan Harker comes to his castle at the beginning of the movie, Dracula is an old, weak-looking man, and side note, the atmosphere of Transylvania in this movie is utterly brilliant. It has a creeping terror that around any corner your worst nightmare might pop out. Something is watching you, ready to rip out your throat. This comes through even in the most minor aesthetic decisions within Coppola's filmmaking. For example, while Dracula converses with Harker, his shadow tells his true thoughts, wanting to strangle Harker, showing the power of this god confined to the body of a man. This also gives us an insight into the mind of Dracula. Though he looks like one of us, his intentions are devilish through and through. Coppola utilizes his mastery of cinematic storytelling and infuses the movie with visual complexity. His choices all either establish a perfectly horrifying atmosphere or allow us to understand the deeper motivations of these characters. His idea wasn't to create something bland. Let's not do formula. Give me something that either comes from the research or that comes from your own nightmares. I gave them paintings and I gave them drawings and I talked to them about how I thought the imagery could work. He was trying to create a dream, one that sucks you in and won't let go, one that emanates the power of Dracula. And yet, deep down, he's still just a man, someone who wants to be loved. When he gets to England and sees Mina, he at first has no idea what to do, how to interact with her. He spent so many centuries alone. Well, not alone. He has some scary brides living in his basement, but from what I've seen, their relationship does not seem too neighborly. His base instinct tells him to be the monster that he has become, to use his power that he has gathered in his time on Earth to state that he is finally here to regain his wife. He then sees this isn't working, so he has to change. He has to connect with her. The thing is, this isn't done out of a mutual love. It's not a You've Got Mail situation where even though Tom Hanks ruins Meg Ryan's literal entire way of life, they still get together in the end because of love. Dracula is a selfish son of a bitch. Every choice he ever makes is for himself. What he does to others when he hunts and kills you, it's all some sort of game to him.
Yeah, if I might just jump in here for a quick second, what he does to others when he hunts and kills people, it's almost like watching an addict who doesn't get the high off of the substance and vices that he used to, but he kind of just goes through the motions because it's what he does, but there's no real pleasure in it. I mean, yeah, maybe from time to time there'll be like an uptick in dopamine, but for the most part, it is a bit hollow, which is why when Mina enters the picture, everything changes. The reincarnation of his wife, the person whose death sent him into this eternal spiral of suffering and substance abuse, causes a shift within him, although he's not entirely sure how to act, and so he just kind of goes about it the way he always has. He must have her. He needs her in his life, and his completely self-centered way of doing things inevitably fails him in the end. At first, Mina starts to fall more in love with him than she ever seemed to have been with Jonathan Harker. They have a connection that feels real. When they're together, it truly feels like even though time has torn them apart, they were destined to reunite.
But when Jonathan finally escapes Dracula's castle, she knows that she and Dracula can never be together. He never leaves her mind though, and as Harker and Abraham, that's what we in the biz get to call Van Helsing. You know, the guy whose first name isn't Van, so if you're making a movie, definitely don't make his first name Van. I don't know how anyone could make that mistake.
As Harker and Van Helsing form their Dracula hit squad, their connection becomes even more powerful, because Dracula's violence, his reign of terror, is just perpetuating more violence, and it doesn't really sit right with her either way. At the end of this movie, be it from Dracula's spell or a true love that has spanned over time, Mina wants to become a vampire. She wants to spend eternity with Dracula. His love has finally come back to him, and of course, he wants to spend the rest of forever with her. Dracula shows another of his monstrous forms, however, when Van Helsing and Harker arrive to save Mina. We get to see Dracula conquering something that has hurt him in the past, a cross. We see him overcoming his weakness for love, but in turn, showing what he has truly become to try and avenge the love that he had originally lost. This then kicks the movie into high gear as a race begins back to Transylvania.
Dracula needs to rest on dirt from his homeland to regain his power each night, and our hit squad just burnt his quaint little English catacomb to the ground. The only choice left is to destroy him on his home turf. Mina screams out wanting to become one of his dark army, and in the end, after a long battle, Dracula kinda wins.
Mina comes into the castle with him, and he could finally have everything he wanted. What's made him feel empty inside for so long is now staring him right in the face. But for one last time, Dracula's humanity shines through. His love shines through. For the first time in a long time, he makes a choice that isn't selfish, a choice to save someone else. He knows that the supposed life he has had for years is nothing he should bring to another. So instead, he frees Mina of his spell, gives up his chance at love, at happiness, and he dies directly beneath where he had held Mina in the past. It's a beautifully tragic Shakespearean and poetic ending to a beautifully tragic Shakespearean and poetic film. I mean, I think everyone knew what Coppola was doing when he was infusing some Hamlet Easter eggs and imagery into the mix here. I mean, it's essentially that story. So I ask again, what is wrong with people? Come on, let's celebrate the greatness of this weird little offshoot Dracula movie. Bram Stoker's Dracula, Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Try saying that 5 times fast. This magnificent masterpiece of cinema is bad? Absolutely not. It's style over substance. It's loaded with both at the expense of neither. Keanu is bad? Well, maybe the accent is, but I still find him deeply compelling despite not being the focal point of this film.
As it celebrates its 30th anniversary, and oh boy, I'm friggin' stoked for that 4K re-release. Let's honor the brilliance of this movie, the bold decision for Francis Ford Coppola to make a Dracula movie that becomes this weird fever dream that muses on some of humanity's deepest deepest, most primal fears, and the lengths that we will go for the people we love. It's not a style over substance movie, although it is a very stylish film, but it's a masterclass in tone, mood, atmosphere. God, it just, the second you turn this thing on, you just feel it in your bones. And our main character, our villain, our protagonist shines through thanks to definitive work from Gary Oldman. Like, seriously, I don't know if this interpretation of Dracula would be as effective as it is if Gary Oldman wasn't giving it every ounce of his being. I mean, good God, the man went a little overboard on set at times. He was scaring Winona Ryder with how intense he was.
I love this movie. Outside of this picture, Dracula has never been seen as a tragic figure, and here we finally get to see him for not just the horrible monster, but also the man underneath. We can empathize with his pain. He isn't just a villain hell-bent on destroying the lives of others. He's a person trying with all his might to collect the pieces of his own life that he lost. Love is something we all need in our lives. Even when we are the monsters of other stories, the thing that can bring us back is love. This version of Dracula was able to show how much love can change someone's perspective on something. Coppola's film might not be your traditional horror flick, even though it's still filled to the brim with amazing scares, but that's what makes it so brilliant. It has so much more to say about love and what it means to be loved than it does about vampires. They had a passionate story to tell, and through this monster, they were able to find the humanity that allowed it to thrive. It's a story that leaves you with a new perspective on one of the most classic monsters we have in modern mythology, and that, above all else, might be the biggest reason why Bram Stoker's Dracula, as delivered to us by Francis Ford Coppola, is a modern masterwork of horror cinema.